Right now is a time of great excitement in AI, but it's also a time of great anxiety in the AI community. And I want to address that anxiety head on. I want to talk about the question of how to prepare for a future where AI will become capable of doing more and more of the work that we do today. Let me start with a few words about where I'm coming from. I lead a team at Princeton University trying to advance the science of AI agent evaluation. I'll tell you about some of our findings later in the talk. But what's different about this work is that we try to go beyond the usual claims of, oh, look, capability is going up on benchmarks. Those types of claims tend to be misinterpreted by the broader public as implying that agents are soon about to take all our jobs. Maybe that's the case, but what we've been trying to do in our work is try to really understand what are the factors beyond capability that actually matter when it comes to how these agents are going to be deployed in the real world, and try to bring some of that understanding into evaluations. Perhaps the work that I'm better known for is this essay I co-authored called AI as Normal Technology with Sayash Kapoor. And it's a way to think about the medium-term future of AI and how to adapt to it, and in turn, how to adapt it to the needs of society and the economy. So we've been going around writing these essays about, how should lawyers adapt, or maybe how should journalists adapt. But perhaps ironically, the question of how to adapt has been hitting our community first. Whether it's software engineering or AI research itself, AI capabilities in these areas are, of course, advancing very rapidly. And I think the question of what we do about this matters beyond this community. I think the whole world is watching. If we simply roll over and accept that a lot of our work will be done by AI in the future, instead of setting clear boundaries, I think that will lead to an even stronger political backlash than what we are seeing today. So I think this question is not just for us, but it's for the whole world. Okay. Now, from the beginning of AI, historically, there have been these two battling narratives. Is this going to be a technology that replaces our expertise and makes it unnecessary, or is it a technology that is going to amplify our abilities? In the past, the distinction has been academic and philosophical and maybe somewhat theoretical, but now it has become an acutely practical question. Each one of us has to decide kind of which camp we're in or where on this spectrum we're in, because the practical consequences of believing in one versus the other are very, very different. If you think this is a technology which in a few years is going to be able to replace everything we do today, then perhaps the correct response is to build wealth as quickly as possible before our skills become irrelevant. And this is the path that many have chosen in Silicon Valley. You may have heard of the permanent underclass meme. Does that sound familiar at all? I'm seeing a little bit of recognition. So that's one way to think about it. On the other hand, if you believe, as I do, that this is a technology that will greatly amplify our potential, then now is the best time to build skills, especially the skills that are going to be complementary to what AI is doing and is going to be able to do, as well as to build all the things around it, such as agency and taste and judgment and so on. And I want to emphasize that this choice really matters. If you choose the first path and it turns out that AI actually ends up being an amplifying technology as opposed to a replacing technology, then I would argue that over the next few years, you've perhaps lost the best time in history to build these skills that are going to allow us to be super powerful, if you will, and I will explain later on what I mean by that. And that's why I think now is a critical time for each one of us to think about this question. Not everybody will land in the same place, but we should all be thinking about it. Okay, just a couple more words of preliminary remarks before I launch in. So I mentioned this essay called AI as Normal Technology, and that is the intellectual framework for what I'm going to talk about today. So what do I mean by that? When we say AI is normal, we don't mean it's just like a hammer or a toothbrush, some kind of mundane technology. That's certainly not what we're saying. We acknowledge very prominently in the essay that this is a transformative technology on the scale of the Industrial Revolution. And I do want to be very clear about that. We're not AI skeptics. That's not where we're coming from. This is not a slogan, it's a framework. And what I mean by framework is it's kind of a causal model, if you will, of how AI capabilities lead to certain impacts on the economy and society. So it's a 15,000-word essay, and we're turning it into a book. And I mention that because oftentimes people hear the word normal and they assume they know what we mean, and that's not quite the case. This leads to some misleading conversations. So in a little bit more detail, I think the essay makes two main intellectual contributions. And one is to argue that the speed at which capabilities are increasing, which is rapid, does not determine the speed of economic and social impacts. And we look at what all the downstream bottlenecks are and why those bottlenecks will take really decades to clear. And second, it develops a different way of thinking about superintelligence, recursive self-improvement, and so on. And I will develop on that framework in my talk today. So these two main contributions are the first two parts of today's talk. First, I'm going to argue that this framework is correct and useful as a way to think about AI's impacts, unless and until there is some future discontinuity, such as through recursive self-improvement, that leads to future impacts looking very different from past impacts. In the second part, I will talk about, even though we should take recursive self-improvement seriously, why I'm not particularly losing sleep over it. And finally, I want to be clear that I'm not saying that jobs of the future will be just like jobs of the present. A lot of adaptation are going to be required. So I want to give some preliminary thinking on how I think our roles are going to change and how we can best adapt to the changes that are coming.
更多演讲实录与文章已收录至雷锋网ICML 2026深度专区，现已全面上线。专区不仅全面收录了重磅论文的工程化解读、专家前沿演讲，更将持续更新前方记者的第一手会议动态。扫描下方二维码或进入雷锋网ICML 专区即可查看。